Guys, it's Shawn. Let's talk about business litigation and managing your risk. This is something that's very important to every business. I'm going to give you 3 very specific tips today. Stay tuned to the end because I'll bring it all together in our bring it together moment where we see how this all plays together. And of course, join me in the comments as we go along because I love to hear from you what your thoughts are. We may tailor future content to exactly what you asked. So stay active in the comments. I love reading those comments. But more importantly, it allows me to tailor the content to the things that you guys, the viewers, need in the future. So how do you manage your risk of business litigation? Business litigation is not random, right? It doesn't just fly out of left field. Now, occasionally, yes, you do have a left field allegation or somebody files a random lawsuit. Sometimes they even file a lawsuit against the wrong person. But most of the time, we are somewhere in the continuum of risk when a business litigation matter opens up. It is because there were specific risks taken or a failure to manage risk. So we're going to be looking at today, what can we do to manage this risk? How can we minimize the amount of business litigation, and how can we keep our business on the tracks and moving forward? We are, of course, talking about a legal issue today. This is not legal advice. It's not specific to you. It's very general in nature. It should be for educational purposes. Consult your legal advisor. We're also not doing financial or investment advice today. Litigation is always a risk. So we just got to lay on the table, regardless of how careful you are in business, no matter how many tips you follow, no matter how good of a job you do, there's always a chance somebody's going to sue you. That is just part of being in commercial activity. The more you're out there doing, the more people you interact with, the more situations you have with customers, clients, vendors, the more likely it is that you're going to end up in a lawsuit. And sometimes I've seen stuff that has just been really, really, really random, where people would not think they would end up in a lawsuit, but they do, because of minor issues, minor vendor disagreements, etc. In fact, sometimes it's surprising the smallest contracts lead to some of the deepest litigation issues. So it's always a risk that we're going to end up in litigation, but there are specific things we can do to manage that. We can manage risk many ways. Tip 1, clear contracts and agreements. This is a big one. A lot of times when my clients end up in litigation or on the eve of litigation and we're trying to negotiate a settlement, it's because the contracts were not clear as they could be, and the agreements were not clear. So I'll work with a lot of my clients on doing form contracts. Some will jump into new business segments and maybe they won't clear a form with me. Or sometimes people will retain me after the problem has already broken out. But if you can get clear contracts that really state what everybody's doing and have agreements where everybody understands what they're supposed to do, that can end a lot of the litigation before it starts, because a lot of times litigation is about missed expectations. People may agree to this, they may agree to that, they may have certain expectations, but when the fur flies and the litigation starts, it's usually because somebody didn't do what the other person thought they were going to do. And it may not have been a written thing. It may have just been kind of in their head, an understanding, an idea of what was going to happen. A seed was planted. Maybe they talked to multiple suppliers, and one supplier promised one thing, and you didn't promise that same thing, but they got confused in their head. A clear agreement that spells things out can really, really fix these things early on. I bet you've had those situations. Join me in the comments. Let me know when you've been in a situation where you had an agreement and the other person thought it wasn't clear. Again, don't leave confidential information here. YouTube comments obviously are not confidential, but if you have a general story you want to share, would love to hear it. Tip 2, who do you do business with? This is another one where I work with my clients. We talk about client screening, client selection often, but a lot of times when they're newer in business, when they're trying hard to build a market share, when things are changing, they'll be a little less careful about who they bring in as a customer. And this is where I hear my clients say, wow, I should have never taken them as a customer. I knew. There were red flags here and there. They said this, they did that. They're financially unstable. They've had problems with other people in the past. Who you do business with can be a massive part of managing litigation risk. Some people just have unrealistic expectations. Some people love to litigate. Some people make their living off of litigation, right? If we talk about patent trolls and other people who are out in the world of that. And if you want a video on patent trolls, let me know. Drop it in the comments. We can potentially do that in the future. But who you do business with is a critical factor in managing risk. If you do business with the right people who are moving forward, strong about their business model, have clear expectations, have realistic expectations of vendors or customers, then you're in a really different spot than when you're doing business with people who are unrealistic, right? There is a class of people out here who expect everybody to be perfect, expect that if they pay a certain amount that everything's going to come back perfect. And while we as businesses should obviously strive to provide good products and be as efficient and careful as we can be, perfection is an unrealistic target in many areas and many industries. So if your client comes in with an unrealistic expectation, then it's going to be hard to meet that unrealistic expectation. Also, many of my clients note, and I certainly noted in my legal practice, it's often the people that pay the least in the business who expect the most. So just because somebody's not paying a lot doesn't mean they should have lower expectations, or they may not have lower expectations. A lot of times, people that are the bargain basement shoppers that are trying to scrape things together, don't have as much money, are the ones that are going to micromanage, dig through everything, look for every mistake, expect everything to be tailored to them. Whereas the person who has a big budget, is working on big projects, they're going to be more realistic. They're going to understand realistic timelines. They're going to understand realistic deliverables. They're going to understand that maybe there may be some problems along the way because they're dealing at a different scale. So be careful who you do business with. You also need to understand your industry risk. Some industries are just more prone to issues than others. Consumer-facing industries are one that where you're inviting a lot of litigation. You don't have the same relationship as business to business. Maybe you're dealing with business people who are not used to buying goods and services, right? It's an unusual thing. They're not used to engaging in contracts. They're not used to reading contracts. They're not used to the fact that there are limitations on the other side too. A lot of times in the consumer world, people are like, I'm giving up my hard-earned money. I want something really, really perfect. And I do too when I'm a consumer. But at the same time, I need to be realistic of how much is my money buying, what can the supplier realistically do, and what compromises they have to make. So you need to understand your industry and what's happening there so that you can manage that risk accordingly. If you're consumer facing, again, clear contracts are still a huge help, especially stuff that is written out, bullet pointed, clean, nicely spaced. A lot of these consumer contracts are tightly worded, a lot of legalese. People never read them. I actually want the clients to read the agreements if possible. They should understand the agreements before they sign it. That takes a lot of disappointment off on the back end. That's both good customer service, but it's also litigation management. So understand your industry risk. Do what you can to manage around it. Be the outlier in your industry if you're in a high litigation area. Before I do my bring it together moment, I want to know, what else do you have? What have you seen out there? Would love your comments about what you're seeing out there so that we can add them potentially to future videos. Folks, you're never going to get to a zero litigation place, especially if you have a large business. People are going to come at you, especially if they start seeing your revenues go up and business is doing well. But if you start doing the right things, you start screening your customers, asking them hard questions, thinking about who you really want to deal with, and also building good contracts and agreements, and build and revise them over time. Good businesses are going back regularly and updating their customer contracts and their vendor contracts based on experience. As situations happen, you go, what could we have had in our agreement differently? What could we have done differently that would have avoided even getting into that situation in the first place? Go back and revise your contracts. Be selective about the customers, and then also just look at your world and your industry and what's happening and see if you can change your business, see if you can change your model, see if you can do something to put you in a different place. Folks, again, I love your comments. Don't put anything confidential down there, but do join me in the comments. I love writing back and forth with you, getting to know you and letting you all know each other through the comments. So please comment. I'll be there. I check them periodically. Also, please give this channel a subscribe, ring the bell for notifications if you haven't done so yet, so you can get more content like this. And also give this video a like so more people can see it. I really do appreciate when you do that. It helps the channel a lot. All right, thanks, folks. Thanks for being here.